I consider that the so-called black people of the West are actually the Jews of the scripture. And, it's a weird thing in my life because I was always taught that these people from Europe were Jews. And so, you're looking one direction, you're not. But then when you start looking at first you go like, well, are they ethnically Jew? And you look for that, right? And I think the best argument for the ethnicity of their Jewish heritage is the old maps, the old sailors' maps have the interior of West Africa named Judah land, and there's a couple other things that are very Hebrew tribe related. A lot of people contend that the Ibu tribe of Africa that's just really a variation of the word Hebrew. So those are points to be made, perhaps anecdotal, because I think as I've looked into the blood path, it's hard to follow on either side. And so I don't want to contend against the European Jewish people, right? Like if they are a fulfillment of Noah's prophecy, we don't want to treat them the way that Ham treated Noah, right? If these are the children of Japheth dwelling in the tents of Shem, when Noah said that, he was saying they would dwell safely, right? That Shem and Japheth are brothers. So I believe that there's something redemptive to this thing. And so when I look at the black Hebrew, what is solid for me, I think about God's character. I think about the character of God. I think about the evidence of the scripture. I think about what Yahweh says to Moses when he says, surely I've heard the groaning of my people, knowing that this people have groaned. In that same way, the groan of being the captive, right? Being this whole system is parasitic to this one people and keeping this people down. And then you wonder, well, how can you get value from putting another person down? Well, it just is proof that people have value. And specifically, when you talk about the Hebrew people, I think that would also say that, the record of the Hebrew race, do we need to know the blood ethnicity of the Hebrews? I don't know. But I when I look at the way that the Jew of the scripture, the way the Hebrews of the scripture were treated, this people has been treated that way. And what it says of the people in Deuteronomy 28, that if they rejected his law, what would happen to them? That has happened to this people. Read that, Deuteronomy 28. It says that they would be taken on ships into Egypt again and be placed in bondage, and no one would redeem them. That has happened to this people. It's over and over. And so you start asking the question, do you mean to tell me that God's not going to help this people because they're not Jews, even though the system has treated them 100% as if they were? And you don't think the God that delivered captives out of Egypt isn't near to this people? I tell you, they are special to him. And I'll tell you, I was thinking about this as I was coming in, that the idea that the system that enslaved them could then liberate them just is not true. Really, what I think we need in this life is the prophetic eyesight to get out of the way, right? Yahweh is doing an act of deliverance. And I also would say, as part of the black-white equation, I would argue that is the Jew-Gentile equation. That's the same dilemma, that the Jew was black, right? We know that the people that are here that came on ships from West Africa, we call them black, but they're not black, they're brown, because black isn't about the color of the skin. Black is about polarizing the ruling class from the slave class, right? And so when the scripture talks about the dividing wall between Jew and Gentile, the Jew was the slave. When the Jew reject Yahweh, the story was they would go back into bondage. And wait, right? Groan for what a time, right? We know that the scripture tells us that it was 430 years It says 400 once, and then it says 430. So, but still, that's poignant, and that God sent a deliverer. And then we see that the scripture talks about some sort of an exodus, right? And one, even Moses said, one would come like him. So I consider that the so-called black people of the West are actually the Jews of the scripture. And, it's a weird thing in my life, because I was always taught that these people from Europe were Jews. And so, you're looking one direction, you're not. But then when you start looking at, like, first you go like, well, are they ethnically Jew? And you look for that, right? And I think the best argument for the ethnicity of their Jewish heritage is the old maps, the old sailors' maps